accept the mess that life inevitably hands us? I'm Chester Elton, and this is my dear friend and co-author, Adrian Gostick.
Well, thank you, Chess. Yeah, today we're going to learn how to shut off perfectionism, maintain self-love through negative life events, and learn where we should be spending our mental energy. As always, we hope the time you spend with us will help reduce the stigma of anxiety at work and in your personal life.
And with us today is our new friend, Karen Allen, and she's the founder of 100% Human and a thought leader in the areas of mental wellness and personal growth. She is the author of Stop and Shift, the mindset reset that changes everything. Karen began her career in human resources, in talent acquisition, and leading countless training sessions, new processes, and change initiatives. However, at a young age, she suddenly became a widow when her husband was murdered. On the quest to rebuild her life, she discovered healthy habits and lifestyle changes that helped her find her way back to a whole heart and a strong mind. Now she shares practical advice that provides skills to help people push through the challenges in life and at work. Karen, we are delighted to have you on the podcast. Thanks for finding the time.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me and just creating space for this conversation.
You know, it's been great to get to learn a little bit more about your book and your teachings, Karen. So if most people are going to be learning about you for the first time here. So tell us a little bit about your journey and especially the epiphany that you reached along the way that's helping you help others.
Yes. Well, I ended up on this path because I was kind of shoved, I guess we would say. But, life is that way. I think we expect to do things a certain way, and then we expect the dominoes to fall accordingly. But then those curveballs happen. So my background, as you mentioned, Chester, thank you, is in HR. And I really enjoyed the space of recruiting because I was able to help people not just find a job, but really find a space where they could thrive, which 10 years ago wasn't really something that people were thinking about, but I did like to encourage that because I understand how our energy supports our performance. And so if we feel good about our work, then we're going to perform at a much higher level. And so at the time I was recruiting for a national home building company when my husband had started his CrossFit gym. His background, he played basketball for years. He played professionally overseas, but he really enjoyed helping people to dig deep and experience transformation physically and mentally. And so he opened his gym. Unfortunately, as mentioned in the intro, he was murdered. As a matter of fact, I was home doing interviews for an executive level position. My son was with me. I had just picked him up from the gym when I got off of work and left the office. And I got a phone call during the first interview that someone walked into the gym and shot Richard, and he died instantly. He didn't see it coming. It's not something you ever expect to hear. And honestly, at 29, you're not thinking about being a widow before you're 30 years old. We were just getting life started. So that rocked me to my core, but it was the first of many losses that I experienced in that year. I lost my husband, my house, my car, my job, and man, talk about the lowest of low. And finding my way out of that was very tricky. And I think the biggest thing that I realized in hindsight is that we go through different hardships, and it's not just the death of a loved one. It could also be a divorce. It could be losing a job. It could be the transition of your kids moving out of the house. That all of these different life experiences of loss and change create the experience of grief. And so initially I wanted to normalize the conversation around grief. And then I realized that really my heart and my focus is to help people grow. So I switched my focus of the business from talking about grief in the workplace to talking about growth. Because what I found is when we do take care of our personal well-being and when we are very intentional about our personal development, that creates a ripple effect in the world. And so when we become better, the people around us become better, and that's how we make the world a little better too.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Karen. And that's clearly trauma beyond what anybody would ever expect. And we're big fans of the ripple effect as well. You put good out there and good comes back and good ripples through and it's wonderful. I want to shift gears just a little bit. You talk about perfectionism and how that keeps you from doing things. And it looks like you're a recovering perfectionaholic. Is that even a thing?
I started calling myself a recovering perfectionist, and it's sort of caught on. So.
Yeah. So walk us through that and what people can do to to stop that from stopping them being their best self and getting stuff done?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of different points in my life that I was able to draw from and notice how this started to come up. And most of them, to be quite honest, you all have kind of come up in very loving ways, right? When we're young, people encourage us to do our best. They encourage us to go for the A's and the hundreds and, all of those things. They encourage us to win the trophy and be a starter for the team. And again, I think that all comes from a very loving place. But what happens is then we start to create this idea that that's what we have to do all of the time in order to receive any kind of praise or reward or even acceptance. And so now we start to create this idea of the person that we want to be or the things that we want to achieve, but we don't really leave a lot of room for the learning that happens on that journey. And the learning journey is full of a lot of failures and a lot of mistakes. And guess what? If you're not perfect in whatever area you choose, you still can be a valued contributor. And so as I was unpacking this, it actually came up when I decided to become an entrepreneur. And I realized that, wow, there's a lot of failure on this journey. And I had to come to terms with the fact that it's okay to do my best and to just leave it there. And so one of the moments that actually helped to crystallize this for me, big fan of Brendan Burchard. I think he does fantastic work, and I was on his email list for a while. And I remember seeing an email where there were 3 typos, and those typos stuck out to me very much so. And it made me realize that somebody, even at that level of performance and at that level of, I wouldn't say performance, I'd say output, right? That they could still miss a couple of things and it still landed. The message still landed. It didn't take away from what he was sharing in that email. And so I started to adjust how I would work. And I always, this is just my nature, I want to put out excellent work. I do want to do my best. That feels good, right? For all of us, it does feel good when we perform at the state what we know that we can. But there are going to be times where you miss a typo or it just goes out, to the wrong list or what have you. And so I had a moment, this was about a year or 2 later, where I sent an email out and I noticed that I had a typo. But the reason I could let it go and not beat myself up about it was because I did proofread it. I did look over it. I had someone else proofread it. We did the best that we could and it still had a little flaw in it. And so because I could rest with the fact that I knew I did my best and I accepted that I'm imperfect, it didn't take up so much of my day. It didn't dampen the rest of my tasks that needed to get done. It didn't steal my energy. And so that's really how I attack everything now, is just feeling good about doing the best I can with the tools that I have in the moment that I'm in.
That's such great advice. And by the way, another little tip is if Adrian had proofread that email, there would have been no typos. He is our proofreader extraordinaire. Trust me, Adrian has corrected my emails, my texts, our books. And
Actually, no, I just had an article come out yesterday in Forbes, and within 10 minutes, somebody emailed and says, I think you're missing a word. So, yeah, it happens to all of us, Karen. Yeah,
Very
and I was
humbling.
like, oh my gosh, So, yeah, perfectionism, absolutely, yeah.
My life is over. It said form instead of from. That's my worst. Spell check doesn't catch that one. Anyway.
No, I love that. I remember my son when he got to graduate school, and he was getting stressed and stuff. And I said, oh, you're going to do great. And he says, okay. He says, stop telling me I'm going to do great. Tell me you'll get through this. It's a different way of thinking about it, because you're right. We set people up to say, oh, you're so smart. You can do great. It's like, no, look, I'm here to learn. I might not do great. It's okay. I'm just going to get through this thing. Which actually, Karen, brings me to one of the other things you talk about. This life is a highlight reel. And then we need to give that a break, because I think, so many things we do to put on our social media feeds, et cetera. And this idea of a highlight reel is our life. So how do we avoid this and embrace maybe the parts of life that might not be as highlight worthy?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you how I even came to that space of understanding. Being an entrepreneur and not having a full team at this time, I did have to think about my social media presence. And that's the thing. Social media is a marketing platform. So some people may use it to show all the different parts of their life, and then others of us, we use it for business. And so I was trying to figure out the balance between the two. Am I showing my life, or am I showing the ways that I'm teaching and helping people? And what I found was in every moment of every single day, I could be reading a book and I'm enjoying it. I think it was The Alchemist that I was reading. So I was like, oh, I need to take a picture of how I'm reading it, or I need to do. And I completely detached from the experience of learning and soaking up all of the gems that I was getting while I was reading. And it was around that time that I decided I'm not going to do that anymore, because mindfulness is one of the 3 core pillars in everything that I teach. And in order for us to experience life fully, we have to be in the moment, right? We can't live in the past and we can't live in the present. And I think social media robs us of that when we do have to think about, what am I posting? When am I posting? And so what I started to adjust was, okay, first, I'm adjusting this to be completely about business. It is not about my personal life. And one of the main reasons is because I really do believe that social media also takes away a little bit of that privacy. So if you're giving everybody every single moment, then it's not that you're just thinking about it, but then you start to feel tethered to that you have to give every single moment. So that was the first healthy boundary that I started to create. But then it also helped me to realize that I don't want to actually show every single part of my life, but I do want to be able to talk about it from a learning experience. And I think from that space is where we can really connect more deeply with one another. You don't have to put so much energy into curating this perfect timeline of all these wonderful moments, when really, if you're using social media to connect with your audience or to connect with other people, we want to do that in a real human way, which means it's going to be a roller coaster. You're going to share some of those learning lessons. And I think the best part about social media is that we can connect. We can connect with people all over the world and see that we may live in different areas, in different regions, even speak different languages or enjoy different experiences, but we are connected through the human experience. And so you do have to find this fine line of what works for you. Everybody is completely different. But for me, I just wanted to be able to teach from that space and not just show the mess, but really be able to give some value from the messes that I was experiencing. And what happened here, and this actually ties back even to the perfectionism, was I found that it was a really great way to manage my energy. I wasn't wasting so much time on trying to pick out the perfect thing to share at the perfect time, but instead I could just kind of think of, oh, what happened in this month or what happened in this week, and what are some of the highs and lows that I can share, as opposed to thinking every single moment has to be curated.
Yeah, they can eat up a lot of time. Like you say, you go down that rabbit hole and all of a sudden you spent 30 minutes taking one picture, and you think,
and then writing the post and thinking of the hashtag, all the things.
Yeah. And say, I should have a gallery to put this. There's a concept in self-help that's very popular called radical acceptance. And you've kind of upped your game there, where you talk about radical self-love, which I think is really interesting. So you say we need to embrace the mess along the way, which is what we've kind of been talking about. How do these concepts help us?
Well, the best way that it helps us is, again, it helps us to connect to one another, right? Nobody's life is perfect. Yet, if we try to put a highlight reel out there, then we start to show or try to embody this perfect life that is so far from the truth for all of us. So when it comes to radical self-love, it really was in this space of when I was learning how to accept the things that I couldn't change. And so one of those things, as we talked about in the intro, was losing my husband. There was nothing I could go back to, change that. There was nothing I could do to even predict that was going to happen. And so when I started to wrestle with this idea of what acceptance really looks like, the first thing that came up was acceptance doesn't mean that the thing that happened is okay, or that I'm actually okay with it. Instead, it means that I'm acknowledging my starting point. So that was the first thing that I had to get clarity on when it came to acceptance. But then within that, if you're accepting your starting point, that means that you're accepting the good and the bad. So how do we deal with the bad, with the things that feel really, really heavy? And I think of the same way that we would talk to a friend. If your friend was going through something really heavy and, maybe they did mess up, or maybe it was just a circumstance that was completely out of their control, how would you show up for that person? You would show up with a ton of grace, you would put compassion into action. You would, encourage them to take care of themselves if they're dealing with this very heavy moment. Yet, when we talk to ourselves, we know in our head, we're not talking to ourselves like a friend. And I will borrow this word from Michael Singer. He says, in our head, we have two different voices. We have the gremlin and the friend. And oftentimes we talk to ourselves through the gremlin voice. And so by understanding those two different tones that we can hear, by hearing those two different conversations, and really by thinking about how I would talk to my best friend, that helped me in the stickiest parts of life to give myself a ton of grace, a ton of love, a ton of patience even. You don't have to have it all figured out right away. You don't have to move faster. You can make the most of where you are. That's what I would say to my best friend. And through that lens, I was able to shift the conversation and start talking to myself in the same way.
No, I love that idea of the inner voice being a friend, versus the gremlin. I hadn't heard of the gremlin. That's great. How do people learn more about your work, Karen? Where would you send them?
I would send them right to the website. As a matter of fact, I'm very excited. It is under construction and will be launched my birthday weekend. So you will probably get a fresh look at the new brand, but everything is there, from how you can connect with me, how you can learn more through the blog or through the podcast. But the website is the best place to land.
Is that KarenAllen.com?
.co, actually.
.co, great.
M to save you some time.
There we go. Oh, yeah, that extra click. Oh, my gosh. Thank you. That's awesome. Okay, so we're getting near the end here, and one of your first chapters talks about taking control of your mind. And you just mentioned this idea about how we put a friend in there but it's easier said than done, isn't it? Because there's so many distractions pop up. We have so much of our past coming in there. Maybe the voice of mom or dad telling you can or you can't do. And so how do people get maybe a little bit more mindful and give attention to those things that we should be focusing on? Have you got any sort of helpful hints that can help us there?
Absolutely. Well, I have a ton. So let me go through the Rolodex real quick. Now, I'll tell you the first one that made the biggest impact. And I didn't even understand why at the time that I was practicing it. But now my work is a trifecta of mindfulness, positive psychology, and neuroplasticity. And so I didn't even have these words in my vocabulary when they started to happen intuitively. But I remember just following my thoughts and noticing that everything I was focusing on was causing this dread and this misery. Obviously, you heard my story, so you know where I was starting. And so in that space, I started to recognize that what I was focusing on was expanding. It was taking up more space inside of me. So if I was focusing on why I was angry, I felt filled of anger. So then I thought, well, I need a break from this because it's really wearing me down and it's going to turn me into a mom that I don't want to be for my son. One that's miserable, one that's bitter and even unhealthy. And so even though at the time I didn't feel like I had a lot to be grateful for, at night I would be very basic with my gratitude practice. And by basic, I mean, I didn't know that I had a lot to be grateful for. So I would start with, thank you for this soft pillow. Thank you that there's a roof over my head. Thank you that I had clean water to drink today. Now, again, that seems very, very minimal. And you're like, okay, well, also gratitude can be a little woo-woo. But it's not, because what I found later in my studies is that gratitude is in the space of positive psychology, which is the study of how humans flourish. And in that space, we learn that when you build on the good gets better. But when you start to practice gratitude, you're also creating a rewiring in your brain. And listen, this world, it's full of a lot of chaos. It's full of a lot of negativity. Nobody's going to argue that. And so if we know that, then wouldn't we want to amplify the good and to bring more of that into balance? And we have to be more intentional to do so. So gratitude was a very easy practice to start to crack open a new perspective when I was in a very, very deep and dark time. And now, because I started there, my brain is wired to always see the good. I will be driving and I'll say to my son, wow, look at that sunset. Or, gosh, I had such a great conversation with Adrian and Chester. It just, now because I have intentionally created a practice that amplifies the good, now I can see it everywhere. And that's something that's very, very small, often overlooked, but has a massive impact on our brain.
Well, you're talking to two really big fans of gratitude, by the way. Leading with Gratitude was a book we wrote. We'll send it to you. It'd be great. You know, what I really appreciate what you just said there was it's a simple little practice that can have a big impact. Again, that ripple effect. So that's one of your healthy, good practices, you know, your gratitude practice at the end of the day. Well, what are some of the other things you do to keep yourself in that positive mindset?
Well, there are a lot of things that you can do to try to stay positive, but if you don't mind, Chester, I'd like to share something that I do when I don't feel positive, and it helps to pull me out of that state. So this is something that I practiced early on, and listen, I love a good acronym, but this just happened to fall together. So I promise you this is a happenstance. Sometimes we do feel funky, right? That is just how it's going to be. It could be anything from your kid getting on your last good nerve to something not working right in the business, and you just find yourself in a mood. We have a choice in that moment. We will notice the mood, but then we get to choose if we stay there or if we want to pull ourselves out of it. There's this great quote that says, you can go to crazy town if you want to, just don't build your house there. And so what I do to move out of these funky moods is I actually use the word funk. There's an acronym in there. So F stands for feel it and face it. We have to acknowledge our feelings instead of stuffing them down and trying to suppress them. You know, we have to create some room and some space. And the interesting thing is once you allow yourself to feel those emotions, they actually metabolize in your body. So they're allowed to flow through. That's the first thing, is you have to face those feelings. And then the second thing, which is is to unplug. Again, we are bombarded with information through our devices, through our emails, through people calling, texting, all of that. And so that can be a distraction from whatever's going on inside. So if we can disconnect from everyone else, then we can reconnect to ourselves. We can face those feelings in a healthy way. And then we can move on to the third step, which is to nurture ourselves. That's the N. We are always putting out for other people, right? We wear a lot of different hats. We have so many responsibilities and roles that we play. And so our energy is a lot of output, but we need to be very intentional, especially when we're feeling, kind of funky, to put back into ourselves with all the good things. So a gratitude practice is a good way to do that. It could be dancing. It could be playing pickleball. I love playing pickleball. But there's lots of different things you can do. Again, this is unique to each individual. But when you're unplugging, the way to reconnect to yourself is by nurturing yourself. And then the last piece, which is the K, is to keep perspective. See, our emotions, they can run very, very high, and that's the right side of our brain. They can dominate, and that can become the only thing that we see in the current situation, right? We will replay the worst case scenario over and over again. But what we need to do is we need to integrate our brain. When those emotions are high on the right side, if we use the left side of our brain, which is the logic or the data or the storytelling, then that will help to bring our brain into balance. And so what I like to do when my emotions are very high is I just ask myself a couple of questions like, is this really going to put you out on the street? Are you really going to lose everything? Does everybody really hate you? Are you really that much of a failure? Like, whatever it is, but you're just checking in with yourself and you're asking yourself, like, am I, catastrophizing this situation? And then you have to bring in some truth. That's really what helps to keep perspective, is when you bring in some truth to what's actually happening, then it'll help to decrease the severity of those emotions, right? Which then always leads to the worst case scenario, and instead helps to bring you into balance. By doing that, by feeling it, by unplugging from all those distractions, by nurturing yourself and keeping perspective, you will find your way out of any funky mood that sets you back.
Well, Karen Allen has been our guest. That's a beautiful way to close right there. I think that summarizes your amazing work, Karen. I hope everybody goes and checks out your website, your book, and thank you for all you're doing to help mental health throughout the world. Thank you, Karen.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, Jess, what a delight to have Karen on the show. We didn't know her very well before, but looks like somebody we're going to get to know much better. And my gosh, how vulnerable she was talking through the experience of grief she went through. But, her epiphany is that we all go through grief. And is it a time to grow? I thought that was pretty profound.
Yeah, that is a seismic shift when you think about it, going from grief to growth. And really, stepping back and saying, look, I can change this. I love the title of her book, Stop and Shift. Just stop for a minute and say, look, it can get better, was one of my big takeaways. Actually, you said something that was a big takeaway for me in your advice to Tony. Stop telling people, hey, you're going to be great, you're going to be great. Say, hey, you'll get through this. That's a more reasonable goal, when you're in a tough spot, for sure.
Well, because we hear it too from so much as we consult, is that failure is okay, right? And sometimes you'll try for something really big, and it's okay to just do your best. And we have so much measurement in our society, especially with our kids. And sometimes it's okay to have 3 typos, as she said.
Right. That typo can ruin your day. And we've all had that happen, right? You publish an article and you go, oh, man, I can't believe it. Whatever. And just to let it go and say, look, life is messy. I thought that was a great message to all of us is, look, life is a mess. It's never going to be perfect. And that whole concept of we spend so much time taking the right picture of me reading the book that you stop reading the book.
And we've all done that, right?
Yeah.
But instead, thinking about our social media as, look, here are my learning lessons. Just to say, because we don't do that, right? We try to put our best foot forward, but instead to say, here's what I learned. I was mad on the freeway the other day, and I thought about whatever it is. Are we putting ourselves out there to be a little bit more vulnerable? Probably not, but isn't that more real?
Yeah, and a couple of last things for me, that inner voice, the gremlin, we've all done that, and she said it so wonderfully. You start going down that rabbit hole, and you start with the negative, and it gets more and more negative, and it ripples through you more and more negative, and all of a sudden you're back at that stupid place 10 years ago in a conversation that no one but you remembers, thinking, what I should have said, and of course it doesn't change. And then the last takeaway for me, which I just thought was wonderful, is start with something really simple. That gratitude practice at the end of the day, which you and I are big fans of. I started with, I'm grateful for my pillow. I'm grateful for my roof. And, you start to go through and then you realize that as big a mess as the world is out there are so many things that you can be grateful for.
Well, I thought, that idea of gratitude can help us rewire our brains.
Yeah.
And we know that, right? We've seen that happen. Anytime somebody goes through psychotherapy, whether, whatever type of therapy, I won't pick on any of them, but that you are part of, gratitude is part of that. You start thanking the people who have helped you where you are. And that is part of rewiring our brains to see the good. And so I think that's really positive. And, and finally, too, is just asking those questions of ourselves when we're in those funks, as she so eloquently described. Look, am I really going to lose everything? Am I really does everybody really hate me? Am I, catastrophizing the situation? What truth can I bring in? That can be really powerful.
Yeah, she was just a delight. Great energy, great positivity, and obviously a great story. If you can come back from what she went through, certainly we can come back from things that are much less traumatic and build great lives. Well, special thanks to all our listeners. Thank you so much for taking the time, and to our wonderful producer, Brent Klein, who makes our mess sound much better than the original. And to Christy Lawrence, our wonderful associate producer, who finds wonderful guests like Karen. And if you like the podcast, please share it. We think there's some great best practices here, and we hope that you'll share it with friends that could also need it. Go to our website, thecultureworks.com. Lots of free resources there to help you and your team thrive.
And we love speaking to audiences around the world, virtually or in person, on the topics of culture, teamwork, resilience. So give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about your event to see what we can do to make it a success.
And lastly, don't forget to buy the book. Come on, Adrian.
Anxiety at Work.
And again, listen to the podcast and share it with friends. Listen, it's been a delight to have some time with you here today. We hope there were 1 or 2 really good takeaways to help you in your mental health journey. And on that note, what do you always say, Adrian? Come on, the big finish. You say,
until next time, we wish you the best of mental health.